you get off normal material. This shows the very glassy character of these tubes. This one shows the famous region on Mars called Cydonia, where we have the so-called face on Mars. I'll have a few remarks about that later. There's also a little feature over here called the fort. These are just names given to things. We don't know for sure what they are. But out of the back, or shall we say, the right side as we look at it here, of the fort feature, there's this dark impression in the ground, and it turns out that's a glassy tube coming out of the fort, which we can see here in this greatly magnified view of just that portion, the back wall of the fort and that dark object there. We see that it's actually a glassy tube coming out of the fort, which disappears below the surface a short distance out. Well, with some of the new infrared and ground-penetrating radar techniques, we can now trace that underground as long as it doesn't go too deep. And that produced some interesting results. This is an infrared, which means it's a heat view of the same images. So this is what the face over here looks like in infrared, where we're sensing only the heat, not the light. And this is the fort. And we can see in infrared that the tube traces its way right down to the next mesa. So it goes from one to the other. And in better views than we can see here, there's another branch that goes off and connects with this one. So that's art added by me, but just to show you what it is we're seeing there. So the point of this is that in this and many other cases, the tubes are not random, but they connect interesting surface features. Here's another example. There's a crevice, shall we say, that stretches for hundreds of kilometers across the surface, from way above what we can see here to far below and to the left of what we see here. And here is a high-resolution view of a part of that crevice seen over here, and we see that at that particular junction of where the crevice comes down and goes off to the left, and where a branch of it goes off to the crater and then seems to go around the crater. Just at that junction, we see glassy tubes. And wouldn't that be interesting if that were whatever it is, to go in and then wrap around the rim of the crater is certainly interesting behavior. Here's a case of a nest of glassy tubes. One of the main points of this is that here we have an example of one tube with horizontal stripes crossing over another with vertical stripes, and we can see the vertical ones plainly through the horizontal ones, indicating, of course, that they do cross one another, but they're translucent. The light does pass through them. Here's an interesting case of a tube where a boulder has come in and smashed it. And what happens when the tube breaks? Well, we see that the white bands are very pointed and spindly, possibly giving the impression of sharp and needle-like. And this is lying flat on the ground, and there are exactly two of these for every one of these, because since it's lying flat on the ground, you get the underside as well as the top side that's visible to the eye. So when you break a tube and flatten it on the ground, that's what it looks like. And the same thing has happened down here. This is a flattened portion of the tube from this rock. But this is an intact portion. And there you see the transition between the two. We see that in many cases the tubes have right-angle junctions and network. And here's a case where there's some sort of a terminus where many tubes from different directions come together. We don't know what the glassy tubes are, but we certainly would like to know more. This is an artist concept. Anything with coloration added to these images from Mars Global Surveyor has to be an artist concept. But that's what the imagination might lead us to if we just looked at all the evidence and said, what could this be? Because we can rule out the major geological theories, lava tubes and sand dunes and so on, that have been proposed. This is the first of a set of interesting type of objects that have shapes on Mars. And of course, there are lots of shapes that can occur in clouds and in nature, but these particular shapes are all taken from one particular narrow region on Mars called Cydonia. And Cydonia is where also the famous face on Mars is located, and it seems to have a clustering of these shapes. And it draws our attention for several reasons. One is that it's a nest of shapes that look in many ways familiar. So they're clustered in one area, and secondly, they have relationships to one another, so that the ones that you would associate with aquatic features, such as this one, are in one region of Cydonia, and things that fly are in another region, and things that are mammals are in another region, and so on, such as this. So what's the point there? Well, here's one of those high-resolution strip images taken by a spacecraft. And we were starting to notice that things are organized, and that many of the aquatic-like shapes, such as the one I showed here that looks sort of like a seahorse, and this one that sort of looks like a fish or possibly a swordfish, and this looks like a hermit crab shell. One's imagination can run wild, but this is a darker area and gets darker as you go down, and things that are also aquatic in character are adjacent to it on both sides. Something that looks like a starfish out to this side and so on. And then we kind of looked at this and said, well, you know, that almost gives the impression to the eye of a waterfall. And then